Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Changing the Climate, a show where we talk about the changing world around us and how we can make it better. Brought to you by Climate Change Realty. All right, hello, everyone. We are back for another episode. I am very lucky to have Mr. Mark Steele on the show. Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Ethan.
You're very welcome, man. Yeah, I always just love to get the podcast started, just getting a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be doing what you are doing today, whatever it may be.
Well, is that a cue then?
It's the cue. Take it away.
Wow. I'm a lot of things. I moved to Colorado in 1991 after graduating from college. Thought I'd come out for a ski season, and I moved to Telluride. And 10 years later, I ended up leaving finally and moving back to New England. I'm from Massachusetts.
East Coast.
But in that time, much due to a little stint I did in Boulder in the mid 90s of coming down with my band. I had a band, funk rock jam band. And we decided if we wanted to be super pro, we needed to move to Boulder, like our friends, the String Cheese Incident and Zuba and some other bands that were big in Telluride at that time. And I did take a couple continuing ed courses at CU, one in Director, which is the multimedia authoring tool where you design interactive CD-ROMs, which were probably before your time. But
interactive CD. No. I used to play like Candyland and Legoland on the PC.
Yeah, so it's creating interactive interfaces, and that was the predecessor to Flash. Okay. So, and I also did a course in Quark Express, the industry standard desktop publishing layout program. And with that, I ended up moving back to Telluride to work for the Telluride Daily Planet and laying out the paper.
Cool.
And designing ads for advertisers and doing a lot of work that way, which was great. It really kept me connected with the community and the businesses and what was going on in the news. And just within a couple of years, I left and helped launch a magazine called Mountain Freak. Mm-hmm. And Mountain Freak was a full color kind of alternative mountain culture rag that came out of kind of a dirtbag culture, but was getting more sophisticated. So it was really a crossover between Outside Magazine and Utney Reader and Mother Jones and Powder Magazine, say, or something. So
what kind of work were you doing on it?
I did all the graphic design, all the layout, and the creative direction, and oversaw photo editing. And so basically whatever you saw in the magazine, I put there.
That's pretty cool.
And it was a great experience because we really kind of learned an awful lot and had this passion to really get to talk about the world that we were living in and how to keep it in there and how to make it better. So
that's what this show is about.
It was, and being in the mountain metaphor was really for people who choose a lifestyle or a place that is challenging, and
right.
And how to make that work and how to live with the land, how to live in nature. So we had environmental political news, sustainable living section, a fiction section, and a gallery that was not just a photo gallery like Powder Magazine, it was art. Yeah. And it was a really kind of cutting edge magazine. We were kind of caught in a stoner niche for a while.
Love to hear it.
Had a hard time getting advertising because they didn't know who our market was. Is this like the climbing companies would be in Rock and Ice or another climbing magazine, the skiing company would be in Powder or whatever. And so we found our main advertisers were Patagonia and the Body Shop
Huh.
and new companies that nobody heard of, like Nativa and Guayaquil Yerba Mate, which are now huge companies. But back
Yeah.
then, nobody had heard of them, and they took a chance with us.
How many people
But
were on your team?
we had about 5 people, a
Cool.
publisher, kind of lead editor, and me and my best friend and housemate, who's our photo editor, Brett Schreckengast, amazing photographer who still lives outside Telluride. And actually Hillary White Cooper, who was the publisher, she's still in Telluride, and she is a county commissioner. So
cool.
it was a great learning experience. It gave us a chance to publish really great stories of what people were doing. We had stories on permaculture and solar power and yoga and
Very cool.
hemp, and we printed a section of the magazine on hemp paper. But it was a little bit before its time. Not that any of these concepts were new. People have been talking about them since the 70s, really. But mainstream, they weren't really set in yet. And it was also a challenging time because printing a physical magazine is there's huge costs and huge waste involved. And this was before the internet really had taken full control. So we didn't really have as much web publishing going on then. So it was challenging, and I couldn't, it didn't pay the bills for me. So finally I left in 2000 and moved back to New England, lived in Maine for 4 years before.
No kidding.
Actually turning around, going back to Telluride in order to work on helping this man that my wife and I met, who wanted to launch a nonprofit to raise money for safe drinking water projects around the world.
Is this the Blue Planet Network?
And that is Blue Planet, originally Blue Planet Run, because his concept was to create a running race around the world that would capture the attention of people everywhere and focus it on this crisis where, almost 20% of the people on the planet didn't have access to real safe, clean, reliable drinking water.
Yeah.
And so we started raising money for water projects, and realized that actually the place to really focus was in creating this network and a platform for managing the process for NGOs all over the world to create a project plan and apply for funding, and then
NGO, not non-government
organizations around the world, and more kind of small. I mean, part of the network was Water Aid, which is huge, and Water for People. It's actually based out of Denver. That's quite big. But also a lot of little organizations like in Nicaragua and Rwanda, in all over Africa, countries, and in India. So we really focused on creating that platform. And so we eventually had the largest database of water project information in the world.
No kidding.
And what we were doing that nobody else was doing was actually tracking where a project was implemented, what the status of it was, and even costs and what went into it and how it was done. And the concept behind it was that we needed hundreds of thousands of projects in order to do it right in these communities. Whereas the World Bank or the UN, they would be focused on a large municipal water treatment plant that would serve 1 million people in a city. And what that would do is just bring people from the rural communities into the city and overpopulate them. And so these small communities that weren't being helped, what they really needed was a small improved borehole well, or rain harvesting system off of the school, say, off the rooftop, and really simple solutions. So these were $5,000-$10,000 projects. And
is this when you had moved back to Colorado at this point? This is 2004 time?
Back to Telluride. And my colleague Rajesh Shah, who actually was born in India, he really came up with this concept of crowdsourcing it and putting it up in the the power of the crowd, of this community of other NGOs. So we did a peer-to-peer network where one organization would peer review the other's request for funding, basically their project description. And we were trying to use that in order to really build best practices and have all the different groups sharing information on what really worked. And then making it very transparent. And we thought this was going to really crack the code and fix the industry and this crisis. But what we found was that nonprofits, especially big foundations, Gates Foundation and Omidyar and Hilton, Clinton, they were all pretty resistant to having that much transparency. And
shocker.
When you're doing a lot of funding for people, you want to be able to say, we gave safe drinking water to 100,000 people, and not to say, well, we created a project that served 100,000 people and 2 years later it stopped working.
I have a question.
That was the standard.
So when you say you were working, first off, was this a side project, or did this become your main dig?
This became my main thing. After leaving the magazine, I basically had the skills I just started my own graphic design business and web development business. But I also, with that training from CU, I really focused on Flash development. And so I had a really great niche.
Probably blowing up that time.
So for about 4 or 5 years, 2000 to 2005 or whatever, 6, all I did was build Flash websites. And they were cutting edge, beautiful, all look different, and all created an interesting interface where you could dive right into the content and understand the navigation of it.
Gotcha.
Have more video game type kind of interface. And that was great until Apple devices came out, and Apple decided that they didn't want plug-in draining battery power.
Interesting.
And also, there was the problem when you have tablets and phones, you don't have the same mouse over experience of dragging your mouse around, which Flash really relied on. So they basically killed my niche. And
sorry to hear that.
So
monopolies.
I moved into doing things the other way, but that was also right at the time that I started working full time with Blue Planet Run, and then we changed the name to Blue Planet Network.
Gotcha.
And I did that for about 10 years before deciding if I'm going to work for nonprofits, I'd like to focus it on problems that really impact my family here.
Yeah. So speaking of problems, you mentioned before when you were talking about the work in Blue Planet Run, that was what it was called at the time. You said you were trying to work on this big problem, and I'm curious, are you referring to the lack of clean water being distributed to people, or are you talking about the lack of transparency or connection between all these organizations trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's both of those things.
Sure.
The problem was not technological. It's pretty easy to dig a well. I mean, if you have the labor to do it, and you can use sand basically to filter water. So it was creating the education and the incentives and the know-how and the political will to actually start making this happen. There are a lot of problems like culturally around it. There's a lot of places in the world where women spend 4 hours a day collecting water to drink and do laundry and do everything. And they live in communities where the men don't want them to not have to spend 4 hours a day doing that. And so they're actually kind of preventing these projects from happening. And then what we found is some of the biggest hurdles that we have are actually parts of the community not wanting this, not wanting to give the freedom to the women. And so it really became kind of a women's rights issue for us. And that's where we got a lot of support and funding.
Cool.
And also education, because this allowed kids to go to school if they weren't collecting water for 2 hours in the morning and then the afternoon. So
very cool.
So there were a lot of things around that. But like you said, the other part is how then do we do this right? And what was going on, we found, is all these well-meaning organizations are going in and doing projects that nobody asked for, nobody gets a sense of ownership on, and nobody understands how to use.
In foreign countries?
Yes. So, well,
Just come on in, just walk into the
yeah,
country
we
and
go
just
in.
start digging wells.
We're gonna give you a well because you need safe drinking water, and they would dig it and put it in. And 3 years later, it would stop working, or a little pin in the pump would break.
And nobody knows
And
how
the
to fix
community
it.
would say, "Well, those white people will come back and fix their well sometime." And they never were taught how to use it, why they needed it, or how to maintain it. They never given the sense of ownership. And so the best practices we were trying to create were to find somebody in the community who wanted to be the liaison or be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Really make sure that education was part of it, and that there was some buy-in from the community, either financially or through labor, and that it was clear on how it was going to be maintained, and there was a program to check up on it and check on things. And so that's what we created with the Pure Water Exchange, and which we were trying to, drive with Blue Planet Network. So that whole experience, then for me, moving ahead and back into, well, we had moved to Boulder for the second half of the Blue Planet Network experience for me.
Yeah.
And so when I finally found somebody kind of to replace me and phase myself out and started focusing more back on my freelance work and also on putting in time with local nonprofits, I started, a friend of mine asked me to co-lead 350 Boulder chapter.
Excellent. Definitely tell me a bit about that.
So
who are you allowed to say who your friend was?
Yes, Elizabeth Gick. Actually, I knew her from Telluride. And
she a co-lead of 350 Boulder County?
She was, and she had moved to Boulder as well and got involved, and they were looking for somebody who would step up and kind of lead the group. So she didn't really do it alone. I didn't want to do it alone, but we decided we would do it together.
Beautiful.
350 Colorado was created by Micah Parkin.
She's been on the show.
Who is probably the most
inspiring human being I've met. Virtually.
And driven and active person that I know. She is a one-person army, but has been really working on building that out, handing the reins over to other people. And so 350 Colorado is its own 501c3 nonprofit. It is it's obviously related to 350.org.
Do you want to remind the listeners what 350.org is and what their goals are? Well,
350.org is a bad name for a great organization. It had a good meaning to it. Bill McKibben, who is an amazing writer and journalist from Vermont, really focused on climate change and identified it and was writing about it 20 years ago and trying to raise the alarm and not getting much attention. So decided to get some students from Middlebury and start up an organization to educate and promote more renewable energy and this shift away from fossil fuels mostly. And they were really one of the, I think, most successful global nonprofits that I've seen or that I've watched grow. And they did it by collaborating with all the other nonprofits, Greenpeace and
Connected
Forest Action Network and all these great groups out there and sharing with them and saying, we want to be part of this. Will you put your name on this? Will you share this with your audience? And really the biggest thing that they did was have people come together and send a message out, largely at first really using photos of here's the people on the beach that is now dropping below sea level, and here's 100 people on the beach spelling out something with flags or whatever, or here's people and showing that all around the world people are connected to this crisis around climate change.
Yeah.
So 350 Colorado is really focused on all of those things of moving away from fossil fuels and moving to renewable solutions, to doing some lobbying work, home, home energy efficiency projects, kind of really a pretty
Variety.
wide gamut of things, but largely and kind of mostly focused on divestment from fossil fuel funding and moving away from fracking.
How long ago did you start 350 Boulder County?
Well, 350 Boulder County was already started. That must have
Oh, it
been
was
when I
co-lead. My
was a
bad.
co-lead, was 5 years ago, I guess.
Cool. Yeah.
And then 3 or 4 years ago was when, in one of the meetings that we had at Alfalfa's, in the meeting room there, that they used to let us have meetings, which
The
is
old
a great
times.
community service, which I'm sure they would still do now. But
Sure.
I put it out there that, largely coming from that experience of Blue Planet Network, is I was frustrated with all these different nonprofits out there with no coordination and no collaboration and no transparency and no synced timing or what we're working on, sharing goals. And I said I'd like to create a platform with a calendar for putting everybody's events on there, and also a list of who all the groups are and what they're doing. And I said, anybody willing to volunteer and work on that with me? And
Yeah.
one guy in the group said, yeah, I'll do that with you. His name was Damian Bogdanovich, and I met with him and we figured out how we could do it for really efficiently, using WordPress and a bunch of open source web tools and plugins, and make it happen. And we just needed to figure out where this would go, because we didn't want it to be under the 350 Colorado umbrella, which would make it a little bit too political, and we wanted it to be really for the people and by the people. And so looked around a little bit, and I had been to some event at the Impact Hub. And
what is that?
At the Impact Hub, which was on Broadway, down off of between Canyon and Pearl, and and Walnut, shared workspace that had a lot of environmental and technology organizations, and also had the Impact Hub Academy, which was kind of an incubator for launching new, kind of more green business concepts. And going on right there was something called the C3 Boulder, the Cultural Climate Collaborative. I got the C's in the right order there, but we're like, well, what is this? And started looking into it, and it turned out they had been focused on doing exactly the same thing that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Had been working on it for really a year, but hadn't put together a website yet. And we went to them. Damien and I met with Emma Ruffin, who was leading that charge, and said, well, that's what we want to do too. And we're like, where are you? And she said, well, we don't have a developer. We don't really know how to do that or have the funding to do that yet. And Damien and I were like, well, we're just going to build it.
Yeah.
So we built it, and it immediately had a space.
And it is?
And a whole board of advisors, basically. And so within a few months, we launched that and had a really receptive audience right off the bat to get in. And then we had a name for it, because they had already thought, well, how about this name, Boulder.Earth? And that was right about when these other vanity plate domain extensions had come out. So that's
I've never seen that before. I've only seen .com, .org, or .net. I don't know how you guys manage that.
Well, they're all out there now. I don't know that they're really the best thing to have, but and because it is a little confusing.
Sure.
But that's what we called it. And we, call it a dynamic grassroots website created for and by the community to foster awareness, collaboration, and connectivity for increased impact on environmental
Gotcha.
and social justice in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah,
I'm actually reading off the homepage
I see that.
so
Well,
that
Mark, thank you so much for sharing your story, and it gives me a lot of insight on how you got. By the way, we've been connected through Boulder.earth. I reached out to the website, and Mark got back to me. And I'm as you're telling the story of how you've got to be doing what you're doing today, I'm noticing the continual trend and theme of how there are these opportunities we have, whether it's building wells or fixing the environment or making these big changes that lots of people are excited about. Some of them, like yourself, who are willing to dedicate their career to it. But then you look, whatever it may be, maybe in your case with Boulder.earth, you found someone down the street who was trying to do the same thing, but maybe you find someone in New York who's trying to do it, or someone in Tokyo, and we're all trying to do the same thing. But there's this lack of connection. And it's so ironic because we have these amazing mediums like podcasts and websites and text messages and social media, but it almost seems like we're more separated than ever by these. So yeah, I guess I just want to talk about this because it seems to be a trend throughout your career is trying to piece these people together, so because we all seem to be, we all want a better world. We're all dedicated to, having a positive impact, be it in our community or on the climate or whatever. And I like you, I'm also trying to find a way to connect us all together. So because separate, it's like that analogy that the sensei he takes like one stick and he breaks it in half, and then he takes like 10 sticks and then you can't break it. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I think for me, being over 50 and feeling like I have more wisdom and knowledge and tools to understand things than I did when I was out of college and thought I was the smartest person around. And now I really have seen what what the real world is. And
yeah, that feeling of being, a know-it-all has evaporated quite quickly. Every year in college, I got less and less confident that I
yeah,
knew what was
actually
going
I
on.
think probably there for me too,
Yeah,
surrounding myself with geniuses and being like, whoa.
absolutely.
But yeah, so a huge part of it, I mean, I think in general most people mean well and want to do something that actually supports life on this earth.
Right.
Just we don't know how to do it. We have a lot of ingrained beliefs that prevent us from really moving into an area, or being satisfied with doing less bad instead of doing good. And we have a connectivity problem, even though everybody now is more connected than ever. We have lost really the ability to, well, especially over the past 4 years, to determine what truth is and to have
Right.
dialogue, real dialogue, where you discuss things, because there are no black and white answers out there, or black and white problems. There's a lot of gray areas, and you have to compromise and figure out things. There's paradoxes in just about every good solution out there.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and that's largely too, the impetus for Boulder.earth is how do we create a space where we can have more discussion and dialogue, and where it's not just a set of 20-word tweets that don't really give the full picture and can be misinterpreted. Right. And right now, Boulder.earth is really just a physical website.
Right.
And it needs to go beyond that into facilitating work on the ground with actual people and groups, and have some more real goals where we can start acting more as, say, the conductor of the orchestra with all these different instruments to make, bigger sound and a more beautiful piece. Or the other way I see it is kind of like being the coach for a sports team, And right now we have lots of little groups out there that have decided, well, we're going to go play shortstop against the New York Yankees
Mm-hmm.
and against, say, the oil industry. And you can't beat the Yankees with just one
Shortstop.
So somehow we have to find third baseman, second baseman, first baseman, pitcher, and the outfielders, catcher.
Team.
Get them all together, working together as a team, and knowing what each of their roles are, and that none of them are going to do it alone, and every one of them is really valuable. And
Yeah.
how do we get you all in sync and start having some real effective action?
Yeah, and they also need to train together, learn together, and grow together, because experiences with others is really what builds relationships. And you can't just grab a bunch of, like, if you take all the best positions from each college football team and put them together and say, go play the Buffs, like they're probably going to lose because they just don't know how to work together. And that's kind of what we're talking about. I'm curious what you think about using, before I get into that, I mean, I kind of try to simplify this issue as best I can, because this show is mostly about the topic of climate change, but lately I've been getting into other topics like loss of biodiversity and plastic pollution as well, which is kind of related. But I kind of see it as these three large entities that need to work in synchrony, and that's the government, businesses, and then people. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, as far, because when I was saying that a lot in the first few episodes, and I'm realizing that businesses are made of people, and governments are run by people as well. So it all just does come down to these people. But I'm curious your thoughts on the government versus like the businesses.
Sure. That's exactly where we started with the organizations, mostly being nonprofits, and also some programs
Yeah.
that aren't even full organizations, and then connecting that with the government, the city of Boulder and Boulder County, and then also with institutions. So you have schools and the university and the labs, which are a big part of Boulder. Where we haven't gone yet is then building in the side for businesses. And so we say, okay, well, yeah, so exactly. So you will be kind of one of the starting points. We have a couple others that really fit the bill, that would like to put in there. But my original vision for Boulder.Earth was that there would be some kind of, it would mean something. So there would be some sort of pledge or commitment. And it could be as simple as saying, yeah, I'm in for doing the most that I can to ensure that we are net zero or have created a sustainable community by the year 2000, fill in the blank, like 2030 or whatever. And just to know that people are on board and willing to keep track of what that's going to take and to gauge where they are in terms of progress, and to go for it, and to go for it together and learn from each other and celebrate success rather than just being afraid of changing, which is really more of what we have going on, is stagnant. Like, you just, oh, it's too expensive, we can't do that. And it's like, when you really look at it, it's less expensive and there's no way around doing it, and it is the future, and we can only wait too long and finally get there and be like, well, it's a little too late. But we need to get all those groups working together. So it'd be nice if we had what it means to be a real, whether you call it a green business in Boulder or a different term, what that means, how it fits into the city's climate goals, and how it works with the people. And we're actually working on a new phase of things, of mapping out what we kind of call the landscape of climate action. But back to what you said, we kind of started with this climate focus, but all of these issues are part of one bigger picture, which is, how do you create a real sustainable community?
Sure.
And use sustainable is kind of a tough term to use, because we're kind of past the time that we can be talking about sustainable, and now we need
to regenerate.
So there's got to be part of that. But if the goal is to have a sustainable community, you're going, that's a good goal to have, knowing that there's got to be a lot of regeneration that goes in between getting there. But upon getting there, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing and relying on for work and for play actually creates as much good for the environment as harm. So that's not an easy thing to do. No. It's a pretty simple concept. So
yeah. So it's a relatively simple concept, like we take care of each other and then like we'll all be fine. But something I'm struggling with, and so the way I build my business is by going door to door, and it's very intrusive to people's lives. I show up and they think I'm trying to get them to sell their house, but really I'm just marketing my business and trying to make introductions with people. But something I do struggle with is what you just said before rings out to me, is that not only do these changes create a better society, but it also has to be done. I mean, like Elon Musk says, it's not a matter of when, like if we're going to switch to renewables, it's just a matter of when. But as an American and as Americans, we're very tied to this idea of freedom, and we're always concerned with governments or individuals trying to take away our freedom. And I'm a very great example of that. I'm obsessed with having my own business. I don't want anyone telling me how to do what I'm doing. But what I'm struggling with is finding a way to inform people about these issues while also being clear that I don't want to infringe on your freedoms. I don't want to force you to do something. I want you to understand the issue on. I'm still struggling to understand the issue on a fundamental level. But once you understand it, like obviously based on what you just said, you do as well. It's not if we need to transition, it's we can't just if life is a gas tank and we're out of gas, there's no more life. So it's like trying to find a way to communicate to people that, hey, we need to do this, but I'm not telling you what to do, man. It's still up to you, which is it's just troublesome for me. So I'm trying with this podcast. I'm trying to teeter the line with my letters and my marketing, but I find it very challenging because people are very apprehensive towards anyone telling them how to live a life in a different way, and especially in this country.
Yeah, especially in this country. And
wasn't a question.
That's a big part of how I've been involved with a dozen different nonprofits over the past 15 years or so, is largely from kind of the marketing side of the communications as a creative director.
I guess I'm asking you for advice.
Tell the story. There's a lot of pieces to it. In Boulder right now, a major part is trust and confidence in the government and that being run effectively. And I think we in America really are the pervading messages. Oh, government's too big and spends a lot and doesn't, takes away your freedom.
I tend to lean that way.
And we need to acknowledge that might be true, but why would then you trash it instead of fixing it? And we need more people involved. We need more voices. If we've got a system for it, we got to use it. So right now, the city of Boulder has something called the CMAP, the Climate Mobilization Action Plan.
Yep.
And broken down into areas that will are just useful for explaining what that is. But the idea is, in order to create the systems change that is needed to get to our climate goals, there are going to have to be some rules and laws and new regulations and programs put into effect that really need people, the population, the citizens of Boulder and Boulder County to go along with.
Support.
And if you want success there, it's probably a good idea to have input from the citizens on what that is and have it be more driven by the citizens, and suddenly the government saying, you know what, no more natural gas in new construction. Yeah. That means, okay, well, there's other ways of of cooking your food, which are actually way more healthy than having a gas stove. There's other ways to heat your house right now. The mini splits that are heat pump technology are actually more cost effective, especially if you power the air flow through solar power. And you can do all these things, but then still, what about putting in my little fireplace that has this ambient? Like, people really have a huge resistance to dropping the natural gas side of things, but that's one direction that this city needs to move into. We need to move away from a dying infrastructure and a dying technology. But you need, instead of just slapping that new law on people, it'd be great if people said, yeah, we're ready for that. We want that to happen. And we want to actually start paying more for this kind of thing so that we're covering the real costs, and that we can process trash, compost, and that sort of thing properly. Because really, there's a lot of roots to the problem. Of course. One is that we have such a bad understanding of real costs of things in this country.
I was going to mention the carbon tax, which seems like a very reasonable solution to me, is that you pay money when you pollute the environment.
And then you end up with the problems of naming conventions, and you don't want to defund the police because you want to reform the police, and then people start saying, oh, they want to get rid of the police. You put tax in any name and it's going to be a losing battle. But if you change that to a different word, and it's the same
fee
thing,
and dividend is what
that's
what they call it.
Is good. And basically what that's doing is trying to make it more equitable. So if you were to say tax something, and then these low-income communities might be hit the hardest, but so you got to find a way of actually then bringing that back to them. So there's got to be ways of doing that, but really the underlying part of it is if people really understood that all these things that we use that we consume for goods, for fun, for energy, that we consider cheap, are only cheap because we're not paying for them. Our children are. We are being subsidized by future generations and by other things like our health. So we're actually paying far more for energy.
Couldn't agree more.
Fossil fuel-based energy than for renewable energy. We pass the costs off onto a different spreadsheet. And we have to really realize that. And then things start making sense. But the problem with making sense is it does actually cost a lot more for specific line items. But we live in a country where there's supposedly hasn't really been any inflation in years, or we have just the 2% inflation going on. It's
that's the goal, yeah.
Maybe for factory farm chicken or head of lettuce, but how much have houses gone up in that time?
Right.
20% a year practically in Boulder. So
that's why I'm here.
we have major inflation depending on how you look at it. And every time we have any of these bailouts, we're doing it again. We're borrowing from the future generations and hurting, the value of the dollar for them. So we have to find ways, which is why the whole CMAP process, or the CMAP, is divided up. It has the typical, the intuitive ones like land use, ecosystems, energy systems, circular material economies, but it also has finance. You can't do any of these things without figuring out how to pay for them. And then what the city realizes, but all of these issues we have to look at through a lens of equity and resilience. Because if it isn't creating resilience, then it doesn't pass the muster. And if it's not equitable, then it also isn't working for us. Gotcha. So that makes what was a simple thing into a really complex puzzle of how you fit all these different parts together.
Right.
And why we think that it's helpful to have another coach out there kind of mapping this out and directing things and seeing if we can get people to go in the right direction and to really understand the plays. And so that's kind of where we are with Boulder.Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But
Makes sense.
there's back to kind of I think where you were going, talking about there are pretty easy things that every individual can do. And I know I and my family have tried to do them. We've insulated our home, made it really efficient. And we have solar panels. We have 2 electric cars, well, an electric car and a plug-in hybrid.
Beautiful.
So we're probably more than 50% renewable based.
Okay.
In terms of our energy consumption. And I have a garden, I have my own compost pile, my own kombucha, and all kinds of things like that. I take a 5-minute shower or whatever, but when you start giving,
adds up.
When you start giving people a whole set of instructions of here's what you need to do to be green and not accept that plastic wrapper and take your own stainless steel mug to the coffee shop, then we're sort of placing the blame for the climate crisis on regular consumers. And we're not going to get anywhere with individuals making each of those little contributions on their own. We have to have widespread systems change.
I agree.
That it means the government has to be involved and society has to be involved. And there actually has to be a huge cultural shift, which is what's kind of preventing it from happening.
Yeah.
And that makes it,
challenging. Yeah. No kidding. Well, thanks for sharing today, Mark. I love rewatching these and giving me something to think about. But I guess I wanted to ask you kind of at the end here. So you've been working in the nonprofit space, it sounds like, for at least 3 decades. Is that right? Something like that. Involved.
If you consider the magazine, which was not that we didn't make a profit.
Sure. Why not? Just for argument's sake.
I'm a musician and actually made pretty good money playing music.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit right here after. I'm just curious how you stay positive after years of watching these issues slowly just get a step better every day, when I'm putting hours and hours and hours and tons of brain energy into how to solve these problems. And I'm already this past week, I've already gotten a bit exhausted. I spent some time studying the mass extinction that's going on. It got me all messed up in the head. I'm just curious how you stay positive when you've been to, have you been to these countries to actually install wells yourself, or were you just?
No, I haven't. And
gotcha.
I mean, after the fact, I've been to several countries, Southeast Asia.
How do you keep going, man? How do you just keep doing what you're doing?
By making sure to go outside and do the things
that's
that
huge.
I love to do. I know. I mean, I get really frustrated a lot, and I spend a lot of sleepless nights thinking about, well, what's the best thing and what can I be focused on? But I do find that digging in the ground, digging soil on your bare hands,
gardening,
is hugely helpful for your health and your sanity. And then also doing something creative. So painting and playing music is big for me. And then also being active, hiking, skiing, mountain biking. Those things will help you realize that, oh, well, we still have all this.
Yes.
Another thing, I've recently read some books that kind of disturbing when you're reading them about the history in America, these historical fiction books, and be like, oh man, we've got such a bad history, and we need to, Joe Biden said, or President Biden said, change is hard. We have to remember. And remembering is hard. And we don't really like to remember. A lot of people have never even been taught the history of this country and the what really was driven by colonialism. And this is one of those mentalities where we need a real cultural shift and change from accepting that it's okay to extract and extract from the land and environment and exploit people. And our entire lifestyle and community economy is based on exploitation and extraction. And that's why we're really struggling right now with, where's the economy going? Why is there so much unrest? Why do we have so much inequality? And it's because we're making the shift from extraction and exploitation-based economy to the new economy of resilience. And
human-centered
so
capitalism.
reading those books can kind of make you like get disturbed, but then you also see, well, geez, it was way worse 100 years ago. And,
right. Correct.
And yeah, we're still facing the same problems, but there is a lot of better in the world.
It's just very
especially if you start looking around the world, there's a lot that, a lot less poverty and a lot less, whether it is in Africa or Asia, there is more balance. But when you come back to the United States, we're actually going the opposite direction. And,
how do you mean?
And there's more inequality happening in the United States.
Right.
Whereas it's going opposite worldwide, the United States is going the wrong direction, and the United States is a leader. The United States, for example, the United States and Great Britain are the only two modern industrial nations that have declining wealth, declining income, and declining life expectancy. Those are all signs of a healthy society. So we're failing society, and we have our health is terrible in this country. Yeah. We spend the most on healthcare. So we're doing a lot of things wrong, and
could be better. Is the point.
And that switch is not as easy as, in some ways it'd be easier if we had a dictator who just said, we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
So democracy makes it a little messy.
Longer, especially when it's so pressing right now that we're really reaching a tipping point. I think, as we've seen in recent years, people are very unhappy and conditions are rapidly deteriorating, but it's not too late.
No, and it's good. It's good that we have this unrest and people are really, I think, you could say that people have been waking up for 20 years, but I think it's really happening now.
Cool. All right, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on. Let's hear about your art. You have a website, right? It's called idigart.com. Is that right?
Yes. So back to the days at the Daily Planet and Telluride. I think that was my first URL or domain name that I read. Since then, I dig art. But as a artist, primarily working in digital medium, as a graphic designer and publisher, and that's where it came from. But I really enjoy more working with tactile paint and panels and getting on canvas. So I've been painting a lot, and I would say I have a style that comes from that combination of digital and paint. So if I do have a large abstract, I'll often work into it some digital elements or image transfers or different, or I'll take a painting and I'll actually look at it in Photoshop to see where I want to go with it, and then I'll go back to painting. So that's the stuff.
That's cool.
Involved in Open Studios this year, and have a couple gallery exhibits sort of in the works that I'm planning, and
I love it.
I'd like to get that going more.
I think that's great, and I really want to encourage people to have some kind of artistic outlet, because I do like the way Kanye West puts it when he talks about Sunday service, how when everyone's singing together, it's like healing. And I think art can be that for people. I kind of consider myself an artist when I'm trying to craft the perfect business model that rings true to my personality. And I've done that through real estate and through climate action and through the podcasts and all that stuff. But I think people who either, if they make videos or they make websites or they do painting, I think everyone having this kind of outlet, especially with all this kind of lunacy and madness going on around the world, can be really healing and make you when you're done, you feel like your emotion and your strife, whatever, has come out into something. And I think we've seen some of the greatest works of art from the most distressed individuals. So I thought that would be a nice way to kind of end the show, just talking to you about. I really liked some of your paintings, so I thought I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think art also helps communicate messages, and it can be pretty subtle or built in, but that's an important way of doing it. People are very visual; they need to see things. So
Yeah.
But
it's all about connection and networking and bringing people together to understand what's going on, right?
And being creative. And I think the key to art is knowing or accepting that really there are no mistakes, and
Right.
And being willing to kind of go for it and try something out instead of not. We got to keep moving here, and
Yes.
We don't know really what the best way of doing it, and pretty much every technology we've created has come back to harm us after 50, 100 years or so. But you got to keep trying something and moving.
Yeah.
Just staying still or sticking with the same things is not going to do it for us. So.
No. And I appreciate you for doing that and keeping on fighting the good fight and coming on the podcast and sharing your thoughts with me today. It's been a real pleasure, Mark. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
No worries. All right, everyone. We'll be back next week, as always. Take it easy. Thanks so much for listening to Changing the Climate, a podcast hosted by Climate Change Realty, the most innovative real estate corporation ever conceptualized. Visit ccrboulder.com today.